I'm Jeff Murrah with True Texas History, and today we're going to be going over the Nueces Massacre, well, so-called massacre. I have trouble calling something a massacre when not everybody was killed, but that's my own bias. The Nueces Massacre is one of those dark spots of Texas history. It happened in 1862. What was going on? There was a strong Union sentiment in some of the hill country counties. Now, this Union sentiment was driven by German intellectuals who had fled the country back in 1848. Now, what happened in 1848? There were revolutions all over Europe, and essentially a lot of the communists got kicked out, the communists and socialists, and some of them came here to Texas. And actually, at one point, Karl Marx, in some of his writings, had talked about how he had hoped that some of the anti-slavery factions in Kansas would hook up with the ones in Texas and create this giant belt of anti-slavery sentiment. So he was well aware of the ones here in Texas and had some strong opinions about it. In fact, his sister came to Texas. So anyways, these, you can call them German intellectuals for the most part, the socialist. The German immigrants had a habit of forming what they call Tunavarians. Tunavarians are essentially sporting clubs and shooting clubs. These, it was almost like a military boot camp, and these men were trained in the use of rifles and firearms, and they had rifles and firearms, because it makes it sound like, these poor, helpless German immigrants were mowed down by Confederate cavalry. That's not the case. It was a fight. There were wounded on both sides. It was a battle. Now, granted, some of the partisan cavalry exhibited some harsh tactics in terms of dealing with the German population in the area. Now, it raises a question because in the frontier counties, men were not always forced to join the service, and they were still having some Indian problems out there, which raises the whole question, weren't these men exempt? Well, debate about that one too. But they were, the Confederate forces were trying to sign up new recruits, and they were desperate for new recruits. And there was an agreement that if anybody didn't want to join the Confederate forces, they were free to go to Mexico. Of course, the catch is you have to go without being armed. And those sneaky Germans brought their guns with them. How dare they? And that led to a shootout where many were killed and some were captured and killed. I don't know the story behind why the prisoners were shot. And then after the war, this was one of the first communities to turn around and erect a memorial. They have the Treue der Union memorial there in Comfort, Texas, and it is the only memorial where a 36-star U.S. flag continues to fly at half-mast 365 days a year. So, that's an interesting piece of Texas trivia. The Nueces Massacre has, there's some bad stuff on both sides. The Confederates were harsh in terms of dealing with them, and I'm sure that they had their reasons. There's some question as to whether or not these men were in a frontier county, whether or not they really did have to sign up for the draft. I still don't know why the men tried to go to Mexico with arms when they knew that they weren't supposed to. Because how can you run a country when you've got a band of, I believe it was 60 some odd men running through the countryside with guns that are opposed to your policies any way you slice it? That's not going to work. And the government at the time felt like they had to take action and do something about that. Of course, you know, and the story since then, they always want to make it bad for the Confederate forces involved. You know, bad cavalry there. And they want to call it a massacre, even though not everybody was killed. And there were people wounded and killed on both sides. You know, how could the Confederates be shot and killed if the Germans didn't have weapons? But this is one of those spots that still has a lot of contention. This is a special request. Somebody wanted to know about what happened there. And so I wanted to go into it. Of course, there are a few more details there because the partisan cavalry that patrolled the area, especially near the border and between the border and some of the big cities, they were harsh. Sometimes they were known as the hanging brood, you know, the hanging bunch, because they were so harsh in terms of dealing with things. Now, when you're on the border, a lot of times you develop harsh ways. I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do. I'm just saying you adjust your methods to your techniques and methods to the circumstances that you're in, and they found themselves in some tough situations. So there's a lot of questions that still need to be explored with this one, but I wanted to go ahead and at least touch on some of it and cover it for you. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, concerns, feel free to leave them below. I'll be glad to get back to them. Sorry I hadn't been on the air for a while. I was taking care of some family members and then I got sick. But I'm better now, so I'm looking forward to seeing you more in the future. And until next time, this is Jeff Murrah wishing you vaya con Dios, my friends. Goodbye.